Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Monir El Azzouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we'll try to help you. I hope it will help you, but we try to help you to answer this question that a notified body will ask you anyway, because now we are in the world of digitalization. So is your software validated? So I know that I have a lot of people that are getting this question and they are starting to panic. It's like in panic mode. What should I say? What should I answer? What should I do, etc.? Should I talk about all my software or not non-software or have no software, etc.? So this is mainly the thing that can happen. And I know it happens because it happens also to all of us. And it's why I have today with me Tibor Zechmeister, who will be helping us to understand more about this topic. So Tibor, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Monir. It's a great honor and it's a great pleasure to talk today about validation and computer software validation.
And I hope you will help us because, as I've said, it's really something that we get asked often, and we have still always this doubt about what should we answer. Or is it okay? Is it for this? Should I mention all my software in my Excel sheet or not, etc. So we will be really looking at that. But before to answer those questions, can you just make a small introduction of yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, where should I start? Maybe just really a quick summary from myself. I've been in the medical device industry for almost 15 years now. I've been mostly in the manufacturer role. I founded my own medical device company, certified my own medical devices, but also quality management systems. So this is the point where I know the pain from the manufacturers right now regarding MDR and IVDR. So I've spent quite some time on that. Um, Currently, I'm the head of regulatory and quality at Flinn.ai, which is a software as a service provider for automation and AI support of regulatory processes. So we create software for companies that need automation tools and support within their regulatory procedures, especially post-market surveillance. And beside that, I'm also an external auditor at the notified body 1304, which is SIQ in Slovenia. So I'm still doing a few audits per year, meaning, yes, I'm also asking my clients and my manufacturers about computer software validation.
Yeah. So just maybe a question that I have not prepared here for you, but is it a low-hanging fruit for you to ask maybe this question? Is it like something like you know that if you ask this question, most likely the answer will be no, there is nothing here?
I mean, I can tell you, I like to ask this question definitely because in I would say 8 out of 10 cases, people have some answers, but if
Okay.
you dig into the details, then you see that there are still some misalignments regarding the requirements, what to validate, how to validate. And really more with startups than with established companies. In 2 out of 10 cases, people are looking at me like, what do you mean with validation? It's working. Why do I need it to validate? And then I'm like, now we have to discuss a little bit about certain sections of ISO 13485."
Exactly. So yeah, I think you are the right person then because if you can tell us exactly what you would expect, if I can say, would be really really great. So but yeah, as we talk mainly in general, so from notified bodies point of view, what are mainly the common issues that you see about this kind of questions here?
Yeah. So I would say one big issue we are witnessing from year to year is that there are so many new digital approaches, software, also automation tools, but also AI tools that are used within a company, within a medical device company, which is logical because you want to improve your business, you want to be more efficient as a company. But the more tools you're using, the question arises, which of these tools really affect the safety and performance of a medical device or generally the quality management system? And did you really validate that? So altogether, you see more and more technologies emerging, but in not all cases, the manufacturers or even the regulatory people from the manufacturers are aware of how much validation or extra documentation this could be causing. So you see maybe two extremes. Currently, I see them. One of them are I would say, more established companies that say we want to keep digitization to a minimum, not because we hate digitization, but simply because they say, so much things to validate and so
Okay.
much documentation. On the other hand, you see, of course, the innovative startups and the smaller SMEs saying we can be more competitive if there is more software and digital tools used. But at the same time, I believe they underestimate a little bit that they still have to work with this ISO 13485 framework of computer software validation. And this also brings me maybe to another problem. Even if the company is having these procedures in place to validate the software, the big issue is then how much effort do they want to put into there? Because it's one thing if you really want to validate a simple Excel sheet, for example, where you say, I could be done in 10 to 15 minutes of testing and then documentation. Or if you're using a complete EQMS system or something similar, which has hundreds of features and you're using all of these hundreds of features, and you somehow need to validate that it's also working for your company.
Exactly. So mainly the as you mentioned also some elements. So the you are what you are looking is mainly what people are using inside the software also. So you can have a big software with, as you said, 100 features, but maybe you are using just two features. You are documenting those two features in your procedures. You are showing the result of those two features. So the idea here is that you don't need to struggle to validate everything, but just focus on those two features then.
Exactly. So I'm usually looking from a free level perspective. Number one is I'm just listening to the manufacturer what tools they're using, because they usually proudly show me they're using Atlassian or something else or an EQMS system. So I'm just gathering the information. So this is also for maybe the audience interesting. What do you want to communicate to the auditor, what you're using and what you don't want to communicate? Because, for example, if you're using random AI tools that are not even checked and you proudly present it to the auditor, then they might be looking into that and checking, hey, why are you using that in your QMS and why it's not validated? The second level is definitely a risk assessment. So even though computer software needs to be validated, we need to assess it on a risk-based approach. And this is also what the standard is saying. I mean, if you really have a simple Excel sheet or, I don't know, a basic software that cannot really hurt a patient or impact the medical device quality, no need for documenting 2 days and 200 pages on that. But if we are talking about something that's maybe critical for post-market surveillance, feedback intake or something like that, and that's not properly tested, then we're maybe talking about life-threatening situations because vigilance is working. And the third level is definitely what I'm looking for, as you mentioned, how much of the software are they using? Because oftentimes you get really over-the-counter software or off-the-shelf software, and you use maybe 1% of all the features you're needing. I mean, why should you then validate all the other 99%? As long as you can argue that the other 99% are not impacting this 1% you're using. This is, for example, also one thing people get really afraid of if they're using software that's rapidly updated, for example. If you use Notion, for example, for EQMS or something like that, I mean, Notion is getting so many updates altogether, but let's not forget, Notion is having so many features, and you probably only use a fraction of those features. So no need to revalidate every time a slight feature change or update has been done, if it's not even affecting your parts of the features.
But you have to you have to prove that then that it's not affecting also that, when there is a change that it's not affecting, that you verified and you confirm that there is no link.
Unearth the pulse of the MedTech world with MedTech Conf, a dynamic platform featuring global events on medical devices, biologicals, IVD, and pharmaceuticals. Stay informed, stay ahead, connect, share, and elevate your knowledge. Become an official sponsor. Make your event shine on the map. MedTech Conf, your key to the MedTech universe. Remember, the future is now, and it's at your fingertips with MedTech Conf.
Absolutely. There needs to be always a justification, because you cannot simply say, okay, this version I will validate, this version I won't validate. So you need to have some justification in place saying, for example, if a software is having 3 levels of software updates, so I don't know, 3.2.1, for example, then explain, will you revalidate during every major release, during every minor release, or even during patching or small bug fixes, and justify that. This is really important, because the standard itself, we will be having a discussion about that, doesn't explicitly tell you have to revalidate during every update or patching of the software. But again, it's risk-based. But as you're saying, it has to be justified. It's really important.
So you talk about the standard. So mainly if we have a person that has never heard about any standard or has never used any methodology for validation or whatever, and they are, I can say, improvising, just arriving and say, I've made it that way because I think it's how it should be done. But you arrive with maybe your experience as an auditor, and you know that you maybe work with those big companies and they have done with these big tools, or these companies has done with these standards, and you arrive with this small company that is just starting and they are trying to improvise something which makes sense, but it's not really following maybe some standards. So how would you approach that?
Yeah, this is really a great question because as you're mentioning, you have the full spectrum of how companies are handling this topic. So I've seen really large enterprises where you have complete software validation departments, meaning that there are several full-time employees doing nothing else than checking newly incoming software, validating it, revalidating it, creating hundreds of pages of documentation and so on, which is of course impossible for a small company. That won't be altogether possible because you cannot hire 10 people just for software validation. But on the other hand, let's be honest, for a large corporation with, I don't know, 70,000 employees, you have a little bit different, I would say, software requirements altogether than for, I don't know, a small startup with 5 people. So regarding the approach, maybe let's shift a little bit first about what's the actual legal requirement or the regulatory requirement, because if we know what's required or not required, it's easier then to find the best strategy. So I've created a few notes from my side, and I've went through some standards and also the medical device regulation, for example, since my focus is on the European Union. So interestingly enough, the MDR itself is not directly talking about computer software validation. It talks about medical device software validation, of course, but not about computer software validation.
Okay.
The only part that is mentioned that's indirectly related to computer software validation is Article 10, Section 9 of the MDR, which states the requirements for quality management systems that have to comply with the European medical device regulation. And the letter D, so DORA, says that you need to have procedures in place for resource management, including selection and control of suppliers and so on. So no direct requirements here. I mean, resource management, your software is some kind of resource your quality management system and company is needing, but nothing special there. If we go to a next level, ISO 13485, which is the best practice and gold standard approach to have a quality management system worldwide, not only in Europe. Of course, we have one designated section regarding computer software validation, and that's 4.1.6, which is exactly about computer software validation, but it's still quite generic because it only says that the organization shall document procedures for the validation of the application of computer software used in the quality management system. The paragraph is a little bit longer, but essentially it says you have to do that. Yeah. If we go into a further step and go into the ISO 13485 guidance document, the official ISO guidance document, this one is becoming more explicit because it tells you have to validate software. It's not an option. You need to do it. And the funny thing is, and this is the interesting part, this guidance document is now bringing us to the best practice or the gold standard approach. And this is ISO TR 80002-2. So it's mentioned in the guidance document. And if you don't read the guidance, you probably have never heard of this standard or this technical report because it's somehow a hidden gem altogether. But this is now a standard, which is, I have it open right now, and it has approximately 92 pages altogether. But this is a full standard just focusing on this approach of how do I validate my computer software altogether.
So this is maybe also something I put on the show notes for people. So if you want to see the standards, so I place them on the show notes so that you can just click and then you can just get to it.
Absolutely. So this is really a good point because I think not too many people know about this technical report / standard. But I think the problem you have mentioned before, how much should I be doing? How complicated should it be? How should I do my documentation and so on? This is really greatly answered in the standard. And of course, we will not discuss the whole standard today because 92 pages is a little bit too much. But what I really like about the standard is that it's initially saying apply critical thinking to the whole procedure, which means validation can mean many, many things. It can mean starting with a simple validation protocol and report where you simply write in there, I'm testing these 3 features, then you are doing screenshots and putting that into a report. But it can be also a full procedure saying, I'm identifying the software I will be needing. I'm defining the risks for that software. I'm implementing an intended use definition. How will it be used? What could be the issues and problems? I create even a life cycle for the software I need to validate. So you can go the full spectrum from really a basic documentation. And let's be honest, in an audit, in most cases, if we are not talking about life and death software, where we really could have severe impacts on the quality of the medical device, what you usually see, which is fully acceptable, is you have an overview, an Excel sheet or something like that, listing all your software with some columns explaining, does it need validation? Yes or no. Why is this necessary? Yes or no, with some justification. And if you then say, yes, there is a validation necessary, you link to individual validation protocols and reports. Meaning, as we said before, if you say, I'm using, I don't know, 5 features of a software, of an off-the-shelf feature software, I'm going through these 5 features. I'm testing what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. I'm going through the testing, documenting everything. If everything is passed, I'm just defining when I need to revalidate that software. So that's the basic level you could be doing. But this standard gives you so many tools in a special toolbox saying, hey, depending on the risk class, maybe it's just this protocol, but maybe you should also do heavy risk management. Maybe you should do, I don't know, unit tests, integration tests, or certain similar things you would be doing for a medical device, for example. So this is the really interesting part, that it gives you the possibility to really choose between so many tools and put together your perfect combination for computer software validation.
So thanks for all this, because the question right now is more about, okay, I understand all what you are mentioning. I get these standards. I read those 98 pages, 94 pages, etc. I try to understand that. I think I understand them. I think I can do it myself. Should I do it myself, or it's mandatory to have somebody else to do it for me? Or do I need somebody that is like trained, certified, etc.? Or no, it's fine if you do it yourself, as long as you are proving that you follow the standards also.
This is an excellent question, because for certain standards and activities, you need to have external qualified personnel to do that. Luckily, this is not the case for computer software validation. So you don't need to have a certain expert that is certified or has at least, I don't know, 5 years of, academic degrees or something like that. No, academic education on computer software validation. That's not necessary, but I would think about it from a pragmatic way. So if you give the task of validating this software to somebody who has never validated software before or has no idea about the concept of validation, I mean, this person will be able to do it with the standards and guidance and so on. But at the same time, what will be the time efficiency and maybe also the quality of the results? So this is like, I don't know, somebody who has never dealt with implantable medical devices gets the task of, hey, could you quickly do a biological evaluation on my implant, who has never done that. So that would be quite complicated.
So it's like it's like somebody that doesn't know how to swim, and you ask him to jump on the swimming pool.
Exactly. So the good news is nobody will drown. So with computer software validation, eventually people will get to know how to do it. But it certainly helps if you at least understand the basics of validation. And the good news here is, I mean, you will have to do validation anyways for your medical device, because there is no workaround around validating your computer software medical device or your hardware software combination and so on. And the good thing is, even if you have no clue about computer software validation, you can at least extrapolate that knowledge from regular medical device validation and saying, okay, I need to have a protocol, I need to have acceptance criteria, and I need to test it, and I need to show if these acceptance criteria are passed or not. So that would be the minimum thing. What I can tell you, what I'm of course seeing, especially for larger companies, is that they're hiring external consultants and saying, hey, you know what, we have this highly complicated software here. It has thousands of features. This will take us months to fully validate it and implement a certain structure. Please help us with that. But then again, I'm usually only seeing that with larger companies, or I would say established medium-sized companies. Honestly, I think I've never seen it so far for really a small SME, so a small or medium enterprise or a startup. They're doing it on their own.
So I had also heard that some auditors are looking also at the independency of those that are doing computer software validation. So if I do that internally, can I be the one that is developing the software and the one that is testing that the software is doing correctly?
I mean, the good news is that the ISO 13485 standard requires this only for internal audits, that you cannot audit your own work, of course. That's that should be an issue. But at the same time, for computer software validation, I would be saying it could even have advantages if you're the person who are developing it and maybe also testing it, because you know all the fringe cases, all the criteria where it might work, where you might have still anomalies left and so on. So it could even have some advantages. The bigger disadvantage is if you're auditing and checking your own work, even if you see that there might be some issues during the validation, you might be more biased to saying, that's okay, we still accept it or something like that.
So I compare that also to the standard of usability. So IEC 62366, where you have the formative study and the summative study, where you are formative, like testing while you are developing and verifying that the features are okay. And summative is like you test it with the users and then you verify that the user is fine. So is it also the same approach? Like, you can continue to test it, but at the end, when the device is or the software is finished, the idea is that you have to validate it maybe also with some users to get some feedback from them. Because there can be the button is too big, the button is too small, or I didn't saw that there was a button, I have to click here, etc. So there was also this kind of usability thing that can happen also.
I think this is a really good approach, because if you're having external people or not people who developed something in the testing procedure, you get a completely different perspective, which can be extremely helpful, because if you develop the software, or if you are the purchaser of the software, because maybe you're just purchasing off the shelf software and you don't need to develop something, you're still already biased and say, I chose this software because I like it, because I like the pricing or the features or something like that. And then again, this could be happening, what you mentioned. If you're then checking your own work, you might be more, I would say, tolerant if there are certain issues or bugs or remaining issues. If somebody else is doing the computer software validation, who is not directly involved in purchasing or development, they will be hopefully more, I would say, neutral or unbiased on that one.
So are you, as auditor, are you looking at those parameters that we just talked about, or it's something that, no, it's as long as you follow what is written on the standards and you have the criteria, and as you said, everything is documented and everything is fine, you are not questioning any of those things?
So I would say the most important thing I question is if they really did a risk-based analysis on how much they need to validate, or if they need to validate the software or not. That's the most important point. I would say I also let it depend a little bit on what type of medical device they are developing. If this is a company that is mostly developing hardware, no software involved or something like that, I would be probably more tolerant if the risk is low. We are really talking only about low-risk software that is used in the quality management system. I might be more tolerant if they say, we had more of a basic approach and not too much. I mean, it has to comply with the minimum requirements, but I will be more tolerant on that. But if I'm visiting a company that is purely doing software as a medical device and should be having a lot of expertise in validating software altogether, and they're maybe having just a little basics in place, I mean, it won't be a non-conformity, but I will then strongly recommend them to rethink this approach if I see that they're not really living the same standard altogether. But to answer your question, I won't be checking them about, did you develop or purchase and also test this? I will mainly go about the aspect of what's the risk of it? Did you consider the risk? Did you justify why to validate it? And is the validation approach they're doing proportionate to the risk they're having altogether? But I think this is really a good point altogether, because it can also increase the quality of the software that is used. Because if you're testing your own software, of course you will be saying the quality is good, but at the end of the day, you want to have a highly efficient software. And there, as with usability, as you mentioned, it's a good approach to also say, let's test it with people that will be the actual users of the software, and not only the people who purchased it or developed it, because there's such a difference, as you pointed out, also with usability for medical devices. I mean, if I develop a medical device, for me, everything is clear. But as soon as I give it to the customer, I'm like, what are they doing? Exactly. This is not how you need to use the software or the medical device.
That's great. You talked also about software that you purchase. This is also one of the big issue or big taboo, or I don't know, when we get this question of is your software validated? You have always this reaction of people say, but I just purchased it, so it's not me who developed that. So if it's available on the market, if I was able to buy it out of the shelf, why would I validate that? Because it means that it's a good software. So what would you answer to them? Hey, just a second. Do you need a EU, Swiss or UK representative? Then choose Easy Medical Device. We can represent you and also become your importer. Contact us at eo@easymedicaldevice.com.
This is such a great question and also extremely tricky question. Why? Because we see in the industry so often that people are stating we have pre-validated software. So no need for validation because everything is pre-validated. And I can tell you, if you talk to two auditors on the topic, you will get 5 opinions on that if you need pre-validation or not. So what I'm seeing altogether, if you really strictly interpret ISO 13485 and also the guidance document, then the document will always say that even if the software is perfectly pre-validated and everything, you should still do some kind of delta validation for your use case, because the developer of the software or somebody who is selling the software doesn't know your use case, because maybe they tested it for, I don't know, for endoscope medical devices, but you're having a clinical thermometer or something like that to use it in that software. So at least the delta validation would be necessary. But the issue is, depending on who the auditor is, they either fully accept pre-validated software because they simply say, yeah, that makes sense. I don't need further proof of that. I am a little bit on the other side saying, and I'm part of the other front saying, if the company has pre-validated, I would say 100% of the features, I don't expect you to revalidate everything one by one because they already done the groundwork on that. But I would at least expect that you take the software, take your use case, how you will be using that, and at least do a little bit of a documentation and delta validation saying, hey, this is not only working at the provider side, this is also working on my side. Because basic thing, if you have a web browser-based software you're using, is it working with your browser? I heard that many companies are relying on Firefox. They don't want to use Edge or Chrome, for example. They're using Firefox. So this would be part of a validation. Is it even starting with Firefox? Or do you have issues with that? This is what I mean with that. So my personal opinion is it's not necessary to revalidate everything 100%, especially if the provider is giving you already the validation documentation or the results of testing also. But for me, it would be more on the safe side to really say, hey, I've done at least, even it's just a 2-page document or something like that. I have done a little bit of delta validation. Then you're, in my opinion, really on the safe side during audits with that topic.
We have also this thing where we purchase something from big GAFA like Google or like those Microsoft or like those things. And I mean, those companies usually they don't provide documentation for validation, or maybe they provide that you have to find out in the website or obscure website or whatever. But then you cannot contact them also to make them, oh, can you send me please the validation for your thing? So how is it working on this kind of thing?
Yeah, in that case, unfortunately, you have to find a compromise. So on the one hand, as we said, if you're using any, I don't know, let's take, I don't know, Google Drive or I don't know, SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint. I'm not getting any money from these brands. I'm just naming them randomly. As you said, the issue is they won't provide you any validation documentation, but you still want to use it. On the other hand, you won't use all the functionality. So if we stick to Drive or SharePoint and you use this as your quality management system repository or your document management system, I mean, what you want to validate in that case is, can you create new documents? Can you manipulate new documents? Can you archive documents, get these documents back? Maybe, do you have an audit trail? Do you know who deleted, created, or modified individual documents and so on? And then you start validating these aspects. So in that case, even, I mean, as you said, they won't provide you any validation documentation on that one. They won't even answer your phone calls because you're not big enough. But at the same time, this means that you have to do some validation. But again, it should be in the scope of really the features you're actually using and not the 20, I don't know, AI features that were introduced but are not used by your company, for example. At the same time, and this is what you mentioned before, this is really important, you also need to justify somehow why the other parts might not influence your software. Or why you say, hey, even if the other parts are updated, this is not affecting me. And in that case, you have to make educated guesses because you didn't program that. You didn't create the software. You don't know the perfect relations between how the individual features, modules, and so on are interacting with each other. So the only thing you can do is risk-based approach. What's the first thing that could be happening if the software is not working? which parts of the software could be causing damage to the QMS, to the patient and safety and so on, and try to test these features. So maybe to give one example, if we are relying on such a storage system, but there is no audit trail, I don't know who deleted something or modified something. I mean, that could be an issue because this means that anybody can modify documents or delete documents, even important ones, like files from your technical documentation or something like that. That would be a big issue. I mean, another thing is if there is a random button that's simply not working, but you're not using that button, or that button is irrelevant to you. In that case, yeah, okay, this is not working, that won't pass through a validation, but you also don't check it because it's not relevant on a risk-based approach.
So here, maybe a case that just to bring to you. So the famous case of Excel sheets. So you are using an Excel sheet and you have either the question, as you said before, you have this table where you put all your software. Should I put my Excel sheet also on the software? On which case should I put it on this Excel sheet where I disclose that to the auditor? Here are my software that I validate or not validate, because as you said, you have the column of yes or no for the validation. So which software or which Excel sheet should I put inside and which should I not put at all because it's not really relevant?
Yeah, that's really a complicated one because here we have the situation that neither the standard nor the guidance document of ISO 13485 gives you, I would say, a perfect or really strict elimination altogether. They give you some hints. For example, it is said that basic tools like word processor, for example, should not be validated. Simply because, I don't know, you buy a word processing tool, I don't know. You have some Excel, Microsoft Excel or Google Sheet, and you're just using the vanilla version of that to document something. I don't know, the serial numbers of your medical devices or something like that. In that case, following the standard, we could be saying, okay, if I use the vanilla version of an Excel sheet just to add data or something like that, that's fine. But now we are coming to this tricky part, and many people are using Excel to do their risk tables, for example, and calculate their risks, for example, their probability and severity altogether. There we could be now discussing, okay, if you introduce formulas into this Excel, like more complicated multiplications or macros or something like that, now this could be seen as a modification of this vanilla software. And in that case, it would be also recommended to validate this Excel, meaning it might take you only 5 minutes because maybe you're done really fast. But as soon as you do some heavy modification here, there should be some kind of validation. But then again, the question is, what is heavy modification? Is introducing a formula, cell A times cell B, is this already heavy modification or not? And again, I can tell you, unfortunately, I've never seen some kind of full alignment in the auditor space. You will see some people saying, oh, you're multiplying in an Excel sheet or have a formula in that, you need to validate. And another person will be saying, come on, it's just a multiplication, no need to validate there. So I think here, for the audience, also important to understand this, I think it's really important to also know your auditors. Are these people who are really into validation? Do they have good knowledge about validation? Then probably validating the Excel sheet is a better strategy. If the auditor, how should I put it, doesn't really emphasize that, or you see that they're struggling maybe with these concepts themselves a little bit, then you could be maybe going into a little bit more risky path. But with the risky path, even if you don't validate it, provide a justification. Because then in the worst case, the auditor will tell you, I'm not okay with that justification. I disagree with that. But it's a much better position than not validating at all or not justifying at all. And then the auditor is saying, hey, but I expect you to validate this. So long story short, I think it's really hard to separate that. And you will see really heated discussions and debates about that because you have the front of people saying, hey, heavy modification means macros in the Excel where you're starting to code things. And other people say even multiplications will be a modified Excel sheet altogether.
Yeah, because as I said, it's really the tricky question when we start to also show to the auditors some Excel sheets because they ask us, as you mentioned, for maybe the risk management or other Excel sheets for whatever calculation we have done, calculation of AQL, for example, when we are taking the sampling, calculation of whatever, and you use this worksheet where you fill some data inside and then you obtain a result, and this result is the one that you use for selecting the products that you will check, etc. So then
Yeah,
this cannot have an impact. So if you have not calculated correctly, then the impact is high. I mean, you see, you start to open this big box of questions and then going through that. So it's why, yeah, it's really important to understand, as you mentioned, maybe the risk-based approach. What is the
yeah,
risk of
yeah,
using this kind of thing? And then you can justify the risk is really low. So even if you make a small mistake about
yeah,
it, it's not like changing the life of anyone. So, but if you make a small a mistake on it, maybe it can damage the full product, etc. So you have to make this approach, I think, to make it better. Um,
I fully agree with you. It has to be always risk-based approach. As you said, ask yourself with the software, even if it's an Excel sheet, what's the worst thing that could be happening? If it's an annoyance, then you can say, okay, maybe not that risky. As you said, if it's maybe, I don't know, introducing issues into manufacturing procedures, and you might hurt patients with that, then maybe a thorough validation or at least a thorough analysis should be necessary
but
altogether.
here, let's introduce also a new concept quickly because maybe I
Yeah,
missed this point. Is about you have some software that you are using during a design, and you have the software using during production. So the risk, I suppose,
yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
different, but mainly, how would you look at that mainly?
Yeah, you're mentioning a really good point because altogether we have, I would say, three different types of software validations. Number one is for the medical device itself. Of course, there you have the clinical validation, you have the usability validation, technical validation. Then we have the computer software validation, where we are using all the tools that are aiding the quality management of system altogether. But as you pointed out, then we have also this level of production validation, where you also might use software altogether. Then you have the IQ, OQ, PQ approach and so on that you're checking, is this properly working, installed, and so on. What I'm seeing is that while, of course, the validation of the medical device itself as a software is, of course, different from the two other categories, what I often see is that manufacturers simply put the other two categories into one box. They say, yes, I have a software in production. I know I need to validate that, but at the same time, it's somehow part of the company and the quality management system. Therefore, I will be just locating that there and documenting everything there. So this is what I'm seeing. I'm just thinking about if I've ever seen a case where this, yes, I've also seen a few cases where they're still separating it, where they say, no, I have my production validation and here's my full documentation. And I have also a computer software validation for my QMS. And this is another part. I've also seen that once a few cases. I think it's always important to know about how many software systems are we talking about. I think if you altogether have 5 systems or 7 systems, maybe you don't need to separate. But if you're using, I don't know, 200 different software tools, then of course it might be meaningful to separate the production software from the quality management software.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important, and it's why this topic of software validation is always tricky, tricky. I suppose also for auditors, it's not only for the manufacturers, also for auditors, where at which level they should go, what exactly you should ask. Is it too much? Is it not? Because yeah,
Yeah,
asking too much for maybe something that is really ridiculous is like also putting some issues in the credibility of the audit.
yeah, yeah.
It's more also about that. Can we maybe do you have some summary of how people what are your principles maybe or things that people should be uh, putting in place to maximize this audit success? So what are the things that
Yeah.
you think they really should be considering from maybe all what we discussed now today?
Yeah, really good question. So if I would have to create some kind of, I don't know, a few step guide how to approach the whole thing, I would really start recommending first, think about all of your software you're using in your company. So, and that is related to quality management system. So don't just think about the obvious systems like your word processors, Excel sheets, or you name it and so on. Think about also software that maybe, I don't know, the regulatory department or quality department is using. I mean, even if ChatGPT is used, for
Yeah.
example, for certain activities, then consider all of these software tools. I had it in so many cases that I went to companies. They're proudly showing me, I don't know, a list of 20 different software tools. And then I'm asking, But wait, downstairs, the development department told me that they're using also 5 different software tools for other activities. And then people are sometimes like, oh yeah, we never thought of that. And so that's first thing, show the auditor that you really have done your homework and at least identified your software. That I think that's the first really good impression you can do for an audit. Show them that you've done your homework. If you missed one little software, that's not too important. That's a completely different story than, I don't know, missing 50% of all the software tools that were presented of you. That's not good.
Agree.
The other thing is, second step, have a structured list, maybe an Excel sheet, hopefully not with macros and other activities, because otherwise you might need to validate it. But have a really complete Excel sheet with at least the information. What software did you identify? Does it need validation, yes or no? Why is it necessary or not necessary to validate this software? Also introduce some kind of risk categorization. You could invent the risk category of, I don't know, high, medium, low. You could classify it to critical, non-critical. I mean, there you can be really creative. So you have also this risk-based approach. So that would be the second step, that you really show the overview about why you are validating or not validating things. The third thing I would strongly recommend is that really have a documented explanation how you do these things. So I have really had it a few times that people explain to me an excellent procedure, how they validate their software. So it was really, I was like, wow, that's really next level how they're doing that. And when I asked them, okay, and where did you document that or note that down? They were like, oh, we didn't document that. So even if you have the best procedure in place, please write it down. It doesn't have to be a standard operating procedure. It could be, I don't know, a general document or so. So you can decide what level of documentation you're doing, but have some written evidence on your approach. Okay. And I think the next step is, if you really want to impress the auditor and say, hey, I know my stuff, then if you really have some time and look into ISO TR 80002-2, I mean, you don't have to go through all the 92 pages and maybe use all the elements in there, because it's a voluntary technical report that's just improving and improving your procedure. Then show them, I've went through this standard. Out of the standard, these 10 things were super cool. I introduced them into my SOP, or I introduced them into my documentation, because I still believe this is one of the best documents out there, and also guidance is there how to do this computer software validation. And at the end of the day, and I hope this is the obvious step, also provide evidence that you did the validation activities and that you documented it. Because I had, unfortunately, a few cases again where they had perfect planning, perfect basic documentation. And when I asked them, hey, when did you validate that software? They were like, oh, we didn't do that yet. And that's unfortunately a problem, because the standard ISO 13485 clearly states you have to do it before using the software and not after or during using the software. So I would say these are really just the summaries. Of course, we could add 20 additional steps or something like that to that. But altogether, it's really important at least to have these basics, because these are also the most common issues I'm seeing during audits.
No, I think it's really great, and I hope, as I've said, with all this discussion, all the point that you mentioned, that people will now understand how to be prepared for this kind of question and have all the documentation and be ready for that. Mainly, how can you help the audience here? I mean, can they contact you and maybe ask you more questions?
I mean, absolutely. If anybody is having a question about computer software validation, they are free to contact me via LinkedIn, for example. Send me a direct message. I'm also usually posting about different parts of regulatory affairs, also sometimes about validation altogether, about challenges and opportunities. So if anybody is having any further questions, they are more than welcome to reach out to me and ask.
Yeah, and don't hesitate to go on the show notes. There will be the links, and also please follow Tibor, because he has a lot of also posts that he's doing on LinkedIn that are really interesting, where you can learn a lot of things on the medical device field. So it's really important. Okay, then thank you, Tibor. It was really a pleasure to have you. Great that we uncovered this famous question, and hoping that now we'll have maybe less auditors that have some non-conformities on computer system validation. And hoping also that people really understand what is computer system validation with this kind of intervention. So thank you very much, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and great to be with you on this show. It was excellent, and let's keep in touch and see you next time.
Thank you.